Oh, there was some, he kept talking about the graphics and I really wanted to see them, but I was driving.
Oh yeah, on page like 2.
Oh yeah, like graphic 50, all 50, the creative financing.
Uh-huh.
What that thought about for me, and he talked about, you know, like setting up like your team and having people that you meet with. And for me, that was like, okay, like I know on the one deal I just closed, we had to look at, you know, owner financing or something like that and kind of what that looked like. But there's just so many different things about creative financing that I don't know enough about to speak educatedly on. And so I was like, okay, what does it look like for me to, you know, have a conversation with Todd and Carrie Ann and say, where in your week can you give me 15 minutes every single week? And we can just talk about what the interest rates are doing and what, you know, when you get into, if you have this interest rate at this price and it does this, that like, nope, that math is not for me. And, you know, just like how do we find out if it's a assumable mortgage or what does this type of financing look like, and just having those weekly conversations.
Yeah.
So that when it comes to pre-qualifying a buyer, like, or even a listing, like, hey, at this rate with the interest rate, let's find out if you have an assumable mortgage that could be appealing and what are the benefits for each party, and be able to speak educatedly on. That was like, ooh, I should be doing that.
Yeah, I also like that this really was about this last chapter was mostly focusing on, you know, like how you can become like an indispensable asset,
Yes.
both for your clients, for other agents, basically anybody who you work on a deal with, how if you do these things with, you know, communicating consistently, you know, like not assuming that no news is good news, and just making sure that you do have those weekly check-ins. And then even if there isn't anything to report, at least making sure that you're making sure that your client feels that, you know, you are, or that they are a priority to you. And making sure that you are fully prepared for anything and everything that could happen, and like just assuaging like any fears, especially that buyers might have, because especially like, you know, the whole, like he spent like a couple pages on it, like talking about like cold feet and like just making sure that you know, buyers aren't finding any excuse to get out of a transaction because that's how they feel they can behave in a shifted market. And so I think that was really important to kind of point out.
Yeah, 100%. Just coming from that place of value.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, kind of too, when we get into that realm of like, you know, what people want to do for sale by owners because they have had a bad experience usually with realtors or whatever. And it's just like, this is why we're indispensable, because we have these connections. We can think outside the box to keep things going and just kind of reassure. Yeah, 100%. All of those players. And then exactly what you just said, Gary Keller was saying, like, you know, you can think nothing's going to go wrong. You can think some things will or everything will. And I would have come from a place of like, anything can go wrong. And Gary Keller was like, I'm not a pessimist, but I just am always under the assumption of everything will go wrong. And just to be prepared, you know, what that looks like, whether, no matter what side you're on, the buy side or the sell side, like, okay, this is what can happen during inspections and how do we cross that bridge? How do we deal with that? Or, you know, all those different things.
Yeah, his on page 246, it has, you know, the 6 bulletproofing the transaction issues and solutions. Yes. And so I like, personally, I like being able to like read lists, and like I'm very pro rubric on things. And so I really appreciate that it like, you know, it has all of the, the common issues that you may run into, and even including, you know, like the co-op agent that you're working with, you know, like, you know, maybe if they are sharing bad information or something, and like, so how to like get around that, get ahead of it, and just like really, the whole bulletproofing the transaction. I feel like the overall summary is, you know, be prepared and be proactive, I think is the general sense of the entire chapter, which makes sense.
It makes sense. Well, and with that co-op agent, that's just the 80-20 rule. Like so many times we get in business with agents that just are either too busy or ill-equipped or whatever, and just non-resentfully, but just being prepared to do some things to keep the ball moving to get to close, because that's the end result, right? It's just to get everyone to the closing table and having more information. You know, for example, when my property didn't appraise, that I had the buyer, the first thing, okay, will the seller reduce? It was like, no, my left.
Aw.
Are we being recorded at least?
Yes.
Okay. And the seller would not reduce that much. The agent was like, okay, send me the termination. And I was like, I said, hold up. There are other options. Like, let's explore some other avenues. Can you give us some time? Can we talk about owner financing? Can we talk about secondary mortgages? Can we talk about, you know, non-occupant gift funds or someone else? Like, can we talk about all these things? And ultimately, we got the deal to close, and it looked like uncharacteristic and from the market that we've been in.
Yeah.
But I think just to have a little bit of skill set around what that looks like and getting used to seeing that.
Being solutions based.
Solutions based, not coming from the place of fear.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that where it got me was like, oh, you know, when we're talking about short sales, foreclosures, and REOs, that for me was like, okay, I do not know a lot about that. I've been involved in one short sale, and I've been involved in one relocation, which they're very different. But it was like, my first thing was like, who do I know? Who do I know that either, if I'm not confident, you know, when I'm pre-qualifying a seller, and it comes up that we are behind on our mortgage and whatever, and short sale or pre-foreclosure might be an option. If I'm not equipped to handle that, who do I know that I can refer that out to?
Yeah.
And still help that person? Or who do I know that's willing to sit with me and walk me through the transaction so that I can learn and everyone kind of win? I think we're going to see some more of those.
I think so. I also kind of like when, you know, when your appraisal didn't come in how it was supposed to, that reminded me of the other kind of note on 248, kind of towards the bottom, like that inspectors can either pave the way to closing or throw up huge roadblocks by simply by the language that they use. And like that he literally is just like, you should like talk to them beforehand and be like, don't say weird things, like, or like make sure that it's like how I interpreted it is that not using like emotional language and just being very objective in it, and not like have like basically like being like, don't tell them that this is the worst thing that you have ever seen before, because like you're gonna freak them out.
Yeah, don't be opinionated.
Yeah, and so it's just like being fact-based and like reassuring. But like I didn't even like, obviously not being an agent, but I didn't even realize that you could like talk to inspectors beforehand and be like, hey, you know, like we want to make sure that this is a positive outcome for everybody, and that, you know, that this is simply like one like final task to like check off before we close, and like and just wanting to basically be like, this is the outcome we're shooting for, like try not to jeopardize that.
Yeah, well, that's why it's so important to have like the preferred vendors, you know. Like I had when I first was getting started, several deals terminate over inspections, and then it was just, okay, I need to learn a lot, so that when I'm in the inspection with the first time home buyer who's afraid of everything, and being able to have that conversation with my inspector, like, here's where they're coming from, is a place of not knowing and fear. And when he points something out, being able to say, okay, let's explain that in layman's terms for the general public to say, like, okay, this kind of sucks, but here's, you know, a reasonable solution, or kind of what that looks like, so we just don't steamroll with fear.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that, you know, especially going into the buyer's market, like at the top of the chapter, he talks about like buyers feeling like they're just looking for one thing to terminate the agreement. And because they're so fearful, because they have all like, you know, like uninformed opinions from family members, or like maybe they had a negative experience with a past realtor that they used, and just making sure that you're like, and then like also tying into the cold feet and basically being like, hey, you know, like, remember, like, this house meets all your criteria, you had all of these positive things to say about it, you know, like, we just want to get to the closing table because like you know, nothing has objectively changed except for, you know, you're hearing whispers and now you're scared, and just making sure that they feel confident in their purchase.
Well, that's like on page 244, it says educate your clients, tell your buyers and sellers what to expect, keep the drama on the deal. Like from the gate, you know, I have a lot of conversations during my first showing with somebody, and it's like, and then we lay out what it looks like once we go under contract. And the first 10 to 15 days are very hectic. Expect that. People are going to be coming at you from all angles, and they're going to demand you get things to them very quickly to keep things moving. We're going to have a home inspection, and things are going to come up, and they're going to be ugly, and it's going to stink, and it's going to make us feel crappy. But what is the solution moving forward, and how to keep that you know, ball on the right track? Whether, and the right track may be, we've determined that there's a major foundation issue and this isn't the one. Okay, so how do we just move forward from that? Which is,
like,
you know,
making sure they don't get too dissuaded if something like that happens.
Or just too like down and out, like, oh, this stinks and boo-hoo, which I'm taking another class, the language of sales, and a lot of the way we speak and the way we pre-qualify our buyers and sellers is having those conversations with our buyers, asking those connected questions. You know, who is this impacting? Who, you know, what does this look like for your family? What will it mean? And then saying like, okay, Mr. Buyer, we can terminate. You are within your right to terminate over whatever the issue is. But what does that look like for your family? When you told me that the goal was to be in a home by this date, and this, you know, you told me what it looked like envisioning your family in this home. So now change that, and what does that look like for you? And just bringing them back to a place of, you know, keeping our opinion out of it and just putting it all on them. You told me this was the home, you told me this was the goal. So what does it look like now? And it's like, oh, maybe, you know, we could shift it a little bit and just keep things moving, and it wasn't as highly emotionally charged as initially thought.
Even, like, his whole contract to close checklist that he has on 260, as someone who enjoys lists, and having due dates and like knowing when deadlines are, I think that like being able to use the contract to close checklist on top of the weekly communication that he suggests, like I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm me and I'm like weird, but it's like if I was a buyer and I like saw the checklist, I'd be like, that's really cool. And then having the like the weekly conversations, and then like being able to follow along as well, and just like, because I like to know things, so I'm sure lots of buyers like to know things, but it's like being like, okay, like, you know, like, don't like freak out, or like, even if things do get behind, be like, okay, like, I'm about to go talk to like our lender right now, or like I'm getting someone else who's another preferred vendor of me to like do this thing for you. And like, just again being like solutions based, instead of being like, oh yeah, and like because it's your client's confidence comes from you. And so if you like visibly get distressed, then they're gonna like start freaking out because they're like, oh no, like maybe it is actually a big deal. And like, because like if you can't control that from your end, then it like, especially like with the shift, the buyer is probably gonna be like, ooh, I want to terminate, like this is too scary now.
Yeah, well, that contract to close, just giving that to them, it's just what, I read before, he said, like, just keep them prepared, tell them what to expect. This is when we can expect all these things to happen by. You have it, everyone has it, there's no miscommunication, nobody's like, oh, I thought it was this day or whatever, like, nope, here's when everything, just keeping them prepared.
There's always going to be little things that are different, but the list itself is pretty.
Yeah.
And it's better to be proactive than having to find out, so what's next?
Yeah.
That's the weirdest feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if Mike is having connectivity issues or something.
Popping in and out.
That are gone.
It is.
Yeah, I just think in two, like, he talks about the 3 people in the transaction that can just keep it going, right? The buyer, the seller, and the lender. And just like how much, for me at least, have I kind of almost don't even think as much about the lender, because it's like, what can we do between buyer and seller, and I want to help solve all the problems, but they have so much more knowledge and resources on that end. That it's like when we come to a hiccup, for instance, with my appraisal, like they saw the appraisal, they know it didn't appraise. And saying, like, instead of racking my brain and trying to just come up with a solution, it's like, hey lender, what have you seen in the past? Do you have any ideas that would work for this particular buyer? You're in their trenches of finances, what would work, and having also that lender have different conversations with them, maybe pulling from the 401k and what that looks like, or, a gift fund and who to ask, or, what the ramifications are of that. I think too, just also comes from coming from another professional, just adds to the buyer another level of trust, like, okay, we're trying to get it done. They have my best interest in how to make that.
Because going back to like one of the previous tactics about creative financing, because there's a lot that a buyer can do with creative financing, there's a lot that a seller can do with creative financing, but as someone from the outside looking in, I had no idea that lenders could be such an asset in creative financing. And so even just sitting at the goodbye Gons, but even sitting at like the front desk and overhearing Todd and being like, oh yes, you can get a grant from like Catapult or something, or him knowing resources that are available for like the region, just makes him like so much more valuable. And being able to come up with those solutions, to help agents, both agents and clients, because you share a client, so it's like you both want what's best for them, and so being able to have them look at it from a different angle, I think is better, or helpful at least.
Yeah, I think one thing I always think about too is like, from the buy side, a lot just come from the what can we do, what can we do. And I think it's just going to be a different conversation to even have with sellers, or to broach the subject of interest rate buy downs, and having that conversation with a seller,
it's in the 3-minute sale, they have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, your home may be unattainable for said buyer, and it's been on the market, and if instead of losing this buyer and going back on market, what does it look like to buy down the interest rate? And just such a different conversation, and even being able to have that conversation and know that that's an outlet, just
it makes you look like you're knowledgeable. Assumable loans.
Yeah.
Having conversations now with sellers that have FHA, VA, mortgages, they can potentially, with that low interest rate that they may have gotten 2 years ago,
Yeah.
it's going to make them look super duper attractive to buyers.
Mm-hmm.
And you can utilize that as, you know, a marketing technique. Huge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is an assumable loan at a 2.0 interest rate.
Yeah.
People are going to be pouncing.
Yeah, no
Oh,
one
yeah.
can get that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's yeah, I don't know, like over the entire book, I mean, because this is the last chapter that we're doing, and so we'll be jumping into the one thing after this. But just like overall, like chapter 12, tactic 12 being really about like, you know, being the most prepared, but then that also, you know, like encouraging like your client, which then will probably lead to more business for you, because like if you have people like saying your name and spreading word of mouth, like, you know, if they're like, they have a friend and they're like, oh, I just closed with Jennifer and like it was so awesome, like, you know, like there were some hiccups, but they were like tackled in a timely manner, and like everyone had a positive outcome, and like I'm really satisfied with, you know, how I was kept in the loop and I felt like a priority. Or yeah, like always like having time to like speak with her once a week or something, or like whatever like they might have needed. And then like they tell that to their friend and they're like, oh, you know, like I was thinking of moving recently and like I want to go to this new neighborhood or whatever. And so then like just like being prepared and like knowing what could go wrong.
You have two kinds of referrals, in my opinion. The good warm kinds, that's what I mean. The good warm referral is you've got an agent or a client that you've worked with that just then organically will send you future business. Then you've got a person in your sphere that already knows, likes, and trusts you, has not done a transaction with you, but they're like, oh, I'll give your name to this friend. What happens with that golden, and I've got one of each really incredible ones that sent me a ton of business. One of them I've never closed before. But she's in the LGBTQ community, and she knows that that's like 100% my wheelhouse, and I absolutely love on that. And she sends me just referral after referral after referral, but we've never closed anything together personally. But when she hears back from those friends and those colleagues, people that she's worked with, that I did amazing, she's just that much more ready to give my name to somebody else, you know? And I just think that there's a way to, and again, I talk about this all the time. I don't follow in a lot of the KW models and systems in terms of lead generation. I always have believed, me personally, it just worked better to work smarter, not harder. And if you have those systems, if you have those checklists, if you have all those things, you're just going to be doing what 80% of the rest of agents aren't doing. You're going to be doing the things that all these other agents are not doing.
Yeah.
And you set yourself apart, and that really can make a huge difference in your business, just being organized and prepared like that, for sure.
Yeah, and then even like with, you know, connections to certain communities like the LGBT community, like I know like as a member of that, but it's like that's like if you're able to like, you know, because like Deanna works a lot with community development, and so like I know that she gets a lot of business that way as well. But it's like if you happen to find an in to a more maybe niche community, everyone really like I'll speak from like the queer community standpoint, is that like if like one person is like, oh, you know, like I'm looking for a dermatologist and like, you know, but I don't want them to be weird about like whatever. And then someone else will be like, oh, this doctor is the person that you should see because they're incredible and XYZ. And then everyone else who hears that interaction is like, ooh, if I ever have an issue, then I should go to that person. And so it's like, it's very like interconnected in that sense. So it's like, I think as long as you're able to, you know, be like consistent and positive, encouraging, like in real estate, then like if you happen to have someone who's a part of maybe a bit more of a niche group, then
it's a smaller community, so word travels faster.
Exactly.
And that's exactly how, like even Asher, who I call the Kevin Bacon of my business, he's also in LGBTQ. So both of my top referrals are in that same niche group. And so it just continued to grow.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a smaller group, word travels fast, and it's a good thing. 100%.
Yeah, because if you're able to be trusted and are like revered by people in like the same community, then it just makes everyone will sing praises louder.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Be prepared.
That's why too, it's important, like, that you say all the time, like, be a student of your business, and so just like being prepared and know, but also like who we are doing business with. Like, is the lender that I use, are they a student of their business? Are they treating my clients at the same level that I am? And that's what they know, like, and trust about me. That's why they refer me. But if I have a lender who stinks, or a title company that just drops the ball, it's like, yeah, you were great. The people you work with are terrible.
Yeah.
And so just like having that A list, doing the 80%, doing all the things and having all of the systems in place across the board, like everyone on your team.
Well, there's accountability in that. And like, I have a funny story, speaking of LGBTQ community. I have a trans client who bought a house with me over in Hazelwood, and we were having their home inspection, and I made a comment in an email to them that so my home inspector is very conservative. He will find these things, blah, 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 blah. Well, they emailed me back and said, okay, well, if he's conservative, could you have them use female pronouns? And I wrote back, I was like, hold up. I didn't mean conservative politically or anything, but it was that conversation. And so immediately putting them at ease and saying, no, I meant conservative in how he looks at the house, like not how he looks at clients or whatever. But at the same time, with that same individual, they had a legal name change and all this stuff, but documents hadn't fully come in or whatever. And I had a huge conversation with the lender, and I said, you got to make sure to get the days right. You better make sure you use the right name. And I do not want to hear about you using this other name. Same thing with with settlement, and the same thing with my home inspector. So I set that stage in advance, because what you don't want in that kind of situation is to have somebody do something or say something that then shines poorly on you or makes you look like you're disingenuous when you're truly trying to make sure that this is a safe space for them. So there's a lot more conversation in the longer you're in the business, the more assertive you get with certain conversations in that realm. I think that those kind of conversations just make you super brave later on with other things, but you have to make sure that you're building your business around people that you trust, that how are they representing me?
Yeah, because like that's the same thing, because it's like, if your lender like dead names your client, you're like, no, actually I'm here to protect my client, and I'm going to make sure that you treat them with the respect that they deserve. And like the whole thing of like with your whole team checking in with them weekly, like your lenders, all of your vendors, just checking in with them. It's to make sure that they have that accountability, and making sure that that you are all on the same page and wanting to support each other.
Well, when you have one cog that isn't part of the plan, like, if you have a client that says, oh, I want to use this random lender, but then you're using your home inspector or whatever, that one piece can wreak havoc. And that's why, I think I know Allie does too, is just having those conversations early on. We've already said, but that this is why I don't just refer brick and mortar banks. This is why. And sometimes there's a really good book called Blessing of the Skin Knee, which is literally the explanation of like, you have to learn. And the minute you show a buyer and that lender doesn't have the cost sheet for them because it's a Saturday afternoon and we have to wait till Monday and we potentially lose that house, I'm just over there going, try not to say I told you so. But you do have then say, this is I just want to circle back to the conversation we had about why we pick these kinds of lenders. Like, this is so important. You have to trust me. It's huge.
Well, even in tactic 12, he even mentions that like, if they really want to use like a certain lender and and you personally do not like them, you could be like, that's fine. could we also do another one in tandem with my lender?
Yes.
And so like, oh, like as a compromise. And so then, you know, maybe working with your preferred lender, be like, hey, you know, like, is it okay if there's no upfront cost? And then you only get the payout, you know, if they commit on the loan with you. And then doing it in tandem. And so then that way, you know, if
they get to see two
Exactly.
versions.
Mhm.
People get really nervous. I think lenders are one of the biggest things they get nervous about, talking about their money and somebody digging into their credit. But again, just like preparing a client around how a home inspection can go. Hey, listen, your lender is kind of like your doctor. They see all this stuff.
Yeah.
So, and that's their job. They really don't care. They're just objective, and you know, they just need to see everything, and you have to be completely honest. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to shop it. I mean, I'm sorry. In the end, I want them to use a great lender, but I also know that they're going to be stuck under this loan for 30 years or whatever. But you want them to get good rates. I'm like one right now I'm dealing with, shopped 3 and had us all the way down under contract until like 2 days before the deadline to make mortgage application. Before he selected, but it was making me nervous.
Yeah.
Because I'm holding onto the contract, like, who's getting it? Who's getting it?
Yeah.
But he ended up getting a killer deal. You know, like people need to shop that, and I support. Yeah. That's a huge thing. Yeah. Do I want that on every transaction?
No.
But that's
And
okay.
that's not right.
Most
for
don't
every
want to do
client
it.
Yeah.
Most
don't wanna do it.
clients, that would just make them very nervous also, or some.
Yes.
You know, also. But I mean, Carrie Ann said yesterday in the team meeting, like, we are not that mad.
Hi. How are you?